Hey everybody, Gormos here with some more simulator battle dogfights from the event mode. This time I got a few fights from the new Guinea event. I really like this event. I think it was one of my favorite ones so far. It provided a nice set of airplanes I like. A large selection, including some interesting ones you don't see that often in events like the Boomerang. So there was something for everybody's taste. Also a lot of good turners, which I like since those are my favorite kind of airplanes. And also, this is one of the few events lately in which the teams had the same size. In a lot of the recent events the team sizes were uneven, and I have said that before, but I think, at least in simulator mode, for most events, those uneven teams are not necessary. Maybe for some of them they are, but not all of them, and not such a big difference as we often have at the moment. I think that is currently one of my biggest critiques when it comes to the event mode, which is otherwise my go-to game mode at the moment. The reason for the uneven team sizes in many events is of course to try to balance the battle rating difference of the planes fighting each other, but that is exactly what I always thought is not necessary, and the more I play those events, the more I think so. The events provide for the most part a pretty good matchmaking, which is way more historical than the battle rating systems in the normal queue, and those historic matchups work very well in sim mode in my opinion, so changing team sizes I feel is not necessary and often just makes the balance worse. I think the new Guinea event is a good example for that. The planes in this event range from rank 1 to rank 4 airplanes, and I have seen both low tier and high tier do well in it. It's just easier to sneak up and surprise a better performing plane in sim mode, and it needs, in my opinion, more skill to fully exploit the advantages of a faster plane without the perfect long-range situational awareness that the realistic battle spotting system, for example, provides. Now, of course, this event is not perfect either. There is a problem which plagues this event as well as many others, but I will talk about this later. For now, let's take a look at some fights. Let's start with one in the Spitfire Mk Vc, one of my favorite Spitfires. It combines great maneuverability with good firepower. It has 4 Hispano 20mm cannons, with a nice ammo supply. In a normal battle rating system, this plane suffers a bit from being very highly tiered, higher than a Mark 9 Spitfire for example, but in the event mode battle ratings do not matter. The plane's engine has a tendency to overheat, and I wanted to set up my manual engine control to counter that, but it seems something went wrong with my key bindings and they did not save, so I do have some problems with overheating in this match. Now, at the start of the match I was climbing a bit to the east to gain some altitude, as I noticed some activity along the coast, and I moved there to hopefully surprise an opponent that is focused on somebody else. I can see a Zero in front and below me, turning hard and pass under me, and I thought about going for him, but there are more planes in front of me and higher, so I figured they have priority for now. The two planes in front of me are a P-25 bomber and a Ki-61 chasing it, and I get a good snapshot on the Ki-61 which takes his swing off. And then I turn and try to respot the Zero that passed below me earlier. I can't see the Zero, but a second Ki-61 is coming in from my 2 o'clock position. As usual, I don't want to go for a head-on, so I wait till he's close enough and turn hard to the right to get on him when he flies past me. The Ki-61 tried to turn into me after he passed me, but because I started to turn earlier and because of the superior maneuverability of the Spitfire, I end up behind him. He is a little bit too far away to provide a really good target, but I keep firing short bursts after him every now and then to keep pressure on him and maybe to get him to turn hard, which would allow me to close the distance faster. And also to maybe get a lucky hit in. None of those short bursts hit, but at least they get close, and eventually the Ki-61 overdoes it a bit while evading and stalls for a second, which allows me to get much closer and in good firing position. And I get his wing. I did however overheat the engine while being focused on the Ki-61, and without engine controls that is actually a problem in the Spitfire. In most planes in War Thunder you can cool down the engine pretty fast by going into idle and dive a bit, but on the Spitfire it's much harder to get the temperature back down. So I actually have to carefully nurse the plane back to the airfield and land just to cool the engine down. Luckily I don't run into any opposition while I return to base at pretty slow speed. Now, after I landed and rearmed, I took off and that time climbed towards the southwest, so the other direction than the first time. However, as I looked back towards the airfield after a while, I noticed some planes flying above my airbase, and it seems that they were enemy. So I reverse course and fly back towards my base to see what is going on there. At this point there are only 3 friendlies still up, my Spitfire and 2 P-38s. The Japanese have twice that number. One of the P-38s attacked the bomber that is flying above our base, and the second enemy plane that is here appears to be a Zero, and I hope I can sneak up on him from behind before he notices me. I try to stay a bit lower than him, and I hope I might be in his death zone that way and I can close into fire position. However, either the Zero saw me or the bomber did and warned the Zero. In any case, the Zero comes around in a sharp turn to attack. I figure he needs a second to stabilize after his turn to aim, so I have a short time to take a pot shot at him before he's ready to fire, even though I usually avoid head-ons whenever possible. Now here I make a pretty big mistake, but I do it kind of on purpose. I enter a turn fight with the Zero, even though the Zero is a much better turn fighter than even the Spitfire, and the reason is very simple. I wanted to try it. I never had a dogfight versus a Zero in a Spitfire in simulator battle mode, and I wanted to see if I can do it. I am a learning by doing kind of guy, and I like to test where the limits of what I can do are at the moment. Now, when the speed is high enough, the Spitfire can match the Zero's turn, and if you manage to get the hit in soon enough, it might just work. But the energy retention of the Spit is just not good enough to keep this up versus a Zero for any amount of time, so my speed is soon too low and I can't match the Zero's turn anymore, so I have to dive towards the airfield. That is another reason why I tried this here. At least I have an airfield nearby if it goes wrong, as it quite clearly does. Now, since the Zero is now faster than me, I hope I might be able to make him overshoot with a barrel roll or something like that when he is close enough. But luckily for me, this is not necessary. The AA hits the Zero and he starts to burn, and in the confusion I manage to get the final blow in. Now, that was mostly luck of course, but I'll take it. Now, my plane took some damage of course, and also overheated my engine again, so I have to land a second time and repair. Now, this time after I took off again, I did not get very far. Only a few kilometers away from the airfield I hear an engine sound, and as I look back I see a Ki-61 closing in on me and I have to take evasive action. Now, a Ki-61 alone would not be such a problem for my Spitfire, but as I focused on the Ki-61 as it comes in for a second attack, I take a hit. A Zero joins the fight and I did not have time to climb. Now that's a problem. I have to evade both of them. There is a friendly P-38 in the area and he is on higher altitude and can pick them off, if I can just evade them for a little bit. I go into a quick scissor with the Ki-61 and after a few passes he breaks off, just as the Zero rolls in from that direction. The Zero passes above me and comes down behind me to my left, and I turn into him as he comes down, so not to present him a good target. And as he climbs away again, the P-38 gets him. So that leaves only the Ki-61, which I have to find again. I come around in a high yo-yo turn and look for the Ki-61, which I at this point assume is high, because the last time I saw it, it was climbing. I for a second confused the crashing Zero for the Ki-61, but as it hits the ground I notice my mistake. But then I see some tracer fire from the Ki-61's 20mm cannons. I don't know what he was firing at, but this gives away his position, and he's much lower than I thought he would be. However, he's also pretty far away, and I don't know how fast he is at this point. Since I just turned around, which cost me some speed, I may have some trouble catching up to him fast if he keeps flying straight. So I have to risk overheating the engine again. Eventually though, the Ki-61 turns around pretty tight. I'm not sure why, maybe the P-38 was coming in for an attack. But anyway, this gives me the chance to catch up to him. And I managed to get close enough to fire and get a good hit in. While all that was going on, the second P-38 finished off the bomber that was flying above our base earlier, and another Ki-61 crashed. So after this Ki-61 is down, the enemy team is pretty much out of airplanes, and this match is over. Well, there was some luck involved in this match of course, But nonetheless, I had a lot of fun flying it, and I think it is worth showing. A pity that the Zero never met the Mark I or Mark II Spitfires. That is a matchup I would like to try. Anyway, that was a fight from the Allied perspective in the Spitfire. Let's take a look at a short clip in the Ki-61. I'm flying the cannon-armed Ki-61 and I was approaching the flight pretty directly when a P-38 passed below me, and I did a split S to get behind him. He does not notice me, so presents a pretty stable target, and I trim the nose of my plane down a bit to stabilize my own aim before I fire. That is something that is important in a lot of fighters, especially when you fly faster. The nose gets light, and if you don't trim it down, you have to constantly press it down to keep on the target, which often leads to instability and makes aiming a lot harder. If you get slower, your nose starts to pull down a bit if you have it trimmed down, but that is not such a big problem. Pulling up to stay on target does not make your aim so unstable than pushing the nose down does. I just wanted to mention that real quick for people new to full real controls in case you don't know that, as it may improve your aim, especially at stationary targets. Now, after I got the P-38, I was looking for more targets, but I could not spot any enemy fighters nearby. However, once I got closer to the little airfield on the island to my west, I noticed some action over that airfield. And as I got closer, I could spot multiple P-25 bombers attacking the airfield and a few Japanese fighters trying to stop them. And since I don't see much else close by, I decide to help out. Now, the P-25 has of course some nasty tail gunners, so I want to attack them in a high-speed diving attack from above, if at all possible. That of course requires a lot of time to execute properly. You only get a very short amount of time to fire in such an attack, so you can only do a limited amount of damage, and you have to climb back up above the bomber after the attack, which also can take some time, especially if the bomber you're attacking isn't slow either. After my first pass on a P-25, I close in on a second one that is apparently already under attack by another fighter. I hope I might get a chance for a longer attack run while his gunners are focused on the other fighter. However, as I get closer, I notice another P-25 below me, which is attacking a Ki-61, and I want to help out, so I go for this P-25. I am too fast at first, so I have to barrel roll around to get back into fire position. Now, normally I would never attack a bomber from behind like that, but I want to get him off the Ki-61, so I take the risk. I aim straight for the enemy gunner in an attempt to knock him out as soon as possible. And luckily I managed to do that before the tail gunner can do serious damage. So now I can stay behind the P-25. At first I tried to go for the tail of the plane to knock out his control surfaces, but after I expended almost all of my cannon ammo, I realized that this is pointless. Instead, I used the fact that I can hang so close behind the bomber to aim straight for the engines and take out first the left one and then the right one. The fires went out pretty quick, but I indeed managed to take out both the engines, so this P-25 is going down. Now I have to say though, I was very lucky here. Because the tail gunner went down pretty fast, I could aim pretty exactly for the engines. If the tail gunner would have stayed up, I would not have been able to do that and most likely could not have knocked out the engines. And I expect that even after all those hits, that the P-25 would have managed to return without trouble to base or even just stay in the fight if the engines would not have gone out. And there is of course a reason why I mentioned that. As I've said at the beginning of this video, there is one problem that plagued this event as well as many others. You very often have a bomber spam that currently is very hard to deal with. There are of course different reasons for why many of the bombers are so dangerous at the moment. A part is because of the third-person gunner view, a part is because of the very dangerous gunners themselves. But for me the main reason is the very unrealistic and forgiving bomber damage model that lets many of them soak up an unbelievable amount of damage. And that's something I want to address real quick, while I show some more footage from the new Guinea event. Now there's one argument that almost always comes up when bomber damage models are discussed, and that is the story of old 666. The story of a B-17 that went alone on a mapping mission over enemy territory and was attacked by a large number of Zeros and other fighters, and despite being heavily damaged, the B-17 and its crew managed to complete their mission and return home and even shoot down a number of enemy planes in the process. Now, the story is pretty well known. It was even covered in the infamous Dogfight show. But if you don't know about it, just Google old 666, there's enough available about it on the net. Anyway, this story is often brought up as a proof of sorts that the current bomber damage model, especially of planes like the B-17, is realistic and should not be changed. Old 666 could do it, so should the bombers in War Thunder, so to speak. I heard that argument a lot on the forums, on YouTube comments, and even during Q&A sessions from Gaijin themselves. Now, I do have a bit of a problem with this line of argumentation, and I would like to explain why. Well, as I have already said, the story of the old 666 and its crew is well known. A lot of people with an interest in aviation or history know about it. I assume quite a few of my viewers do too. So, you know what the crew of old 666 did on this day. Now, I have a question. Do you also know what the crews of other bombers did the same day? One can assume old 666 was not the only bomber mission flown this day. What is the story of the other crews that flew missions the same day? Do you know them? Now, if you are a very good aviation historian, you might know some, but for the most part I would assume you do not, and neither do I. There were most likely hundreds of sorties flown. It's hardly possible to know what happened on all of them. And yet, a lot of people know what the crew of old 666 did. Why? Well, the obvious answer is, of course, because what they did was special. More than just special, it was an incredible achievement. Everything about that mission was above average. The amount of fighters the plane faced on its own, the amount of damage it took and still returned to base, the amount of fighters shot down by a single B-17 in a single mission. All of those are far above average, and that's the point. This story is not a representation of what a standard B-17 mission was. So I do not think it can be used as an argument as to how much bombers in War Thunder should be able to do on average. If a B-17 shooting down multiple planes and soaking up a ludicrous amounts of damage at the same time would not be standard but something that happens occasionally in War Thunder, something that can happen but is not the norm, then I think you can use this story as proof that it is possible to do it. However, in War Thunder at the moment it is not just possible. Doing what old 666 did, facing and shooting down multiple enemy fighters and returning home, is the norm in War Thunder and nothing special. And that's why I have a problem with using this or similar stories to prove what a plane should be able to do on average, because stories like this show exceptional achievements which should not be that easy to copy on a daily basis without even trying. Well, that is just something I wanted to mention after hearing this argument a lot. And this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.